Well, welcome back to our course on Revelation, and this segment is on the two beasts of Revelation 13, and I believe it is section 16 of our course. In the previous chapter, at the end of 12, there was a heavenly battle between the archangel Michael and the dragon and his angels. This is the primordial kind of battle that took place within heaven between the good angels and the bad angels. The good angels, of course, triumphed. The evil angels are defeated and cast out of heaven down to the earth. John then tells us that he saw a beast rising out of the sea. Already in chapter 11, verse 7, we have hints that there is a coming messianic war. And the theme of the entire section from 12 to 14 is about this messianic war. A cosmic battle in chapter 12 ends with the dragon standing on the sands of the sea and summoning a beast from the abyss. Now, much of the imagery here comes from ancient Near Eastern tradition. There are a pair of monsters described in ancient Near Eastern tradition. There is a sea monster known as Leviathan, and that monster appears in Isaiah 27:1. These, of course, would be kind of mythological things, but they appear in Scripture. And then there is an earth monster, the behemoth, in Job 40 and 41, which also, I believe, mentions Leviathan again. So John uses traditional mythic imagery to depict what one interpreter, Richard Bauckham, calls a satanic trinity. The dragon or serpent is a primeval supernatural source of all opposition to God, whom we typically call Satan. The beast or sea monster is the imperial power of Rome, and the second beast or earth monster is the propaganda machine of the imperial cult. So it kind of shows a demonization, if you like, of the structures of the ancient Roman world, and each of them is personified through these kind of mythological terms. There are many examples in somewhat later Jewish literature which interpret the fourth beast in the book of Daniel, which has a series of similar visions, with the empire of Rome. So the first beast. In 13:2, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority to this beast. The power to perform counterfeit miracles which deceive. His throne is seen as his dominion or counterfeit rule over the earth. And finally, great authority over every tribe, people, tongue, and nation, and the authority to make war on the saints and conquer them, but only for 42 months. So again, picking up on imagery from the book of Daniel, there is this temporary apocalyptic time of trial, which is depicted as 42 months here. So really, we need to remember that this kind of demonic kingdom can only imitate the true nature of God's rule. So there is a counterfeit kind of power, a counterfeit kind of throne, and a counterfeit type of authority. The creature will utter haughty and blasphemous words. The worldly success and counterfeit miracles will cause people to worship the dragon and the beast. All on earth will worship the beast except those whose names have been written in the book of life. In opposition to this false worship, God's witnesses are called to conquer through endurance and faith. So again, this is a theme throughout Revelation. There will be this tribulation, and those who persevere will receive the heavenly prize. So if we begin to think about this then, the first beast, the Roman Empire, but we can become more specific. The first beast is described as a beast whose mortal wound had been healed. And it's widely believed in the ancient world that when Nero took his life, they thought that perhaps he would come back again, that there would be a return of Nero. He would come back to life. So the mortal wound that has been healed could be code for Nero. And then there were many contemporary legends of the return of Nero circulating both in Jewish and pagan circles. So people would appear and claim to be Nero returned. This Nero back from the dead then, during the reign of Domitian, one of the later emperors, a number of impostors arose in the east claiming to be Nero. And the second beast could be Domitian, who is considered a second Nero by some Romans. More likely, however, it still relates to the worship of the imperial cult. So the first beast being Rome in general, personified in certain very evil emperors, and then the worship of the Roman imperial cult as a kind of propaganda machine for this. Then in one of the more intriguing verses here in this chapter, we hear that his number, the number of the beast, will be 666 or 666. Of course, many Hollywood dramas have used this number to create a lot of worry in the popular imagination. This is likely the most talked about verse in Revelation. And it says, the reader should calculate the number of the beast as 666. Well, for the modern reader, this seems like a completely veiled, mysterious way of talking. And although John uses other numbers symbolically throughout Revelation, he's using a different technique here involving the use of a mathematical formula related to the alphabet so that you would know how to spell someone's name. So let me explain. So at Pompeii, there were a number of graffiti writings that were preserved by the sudden demise of the city by volcanic eruption. And it's possible that that we see a very same technique in many of these ancient relics, and not just at Pompeii. But here's one. Using numbers as a code was an extremely common practice, both in the Jewish and the Greco-Roman world. And among the graffiti found in Pompeii was one which read, "I love the girl whose number is 545." So the ancient readers would know how to decode this and realize, just like you drive under a bridge here and somebody has put graffiti up, "I love Susan" or something. That's kind of what was written, but instead of Susan, they would use this numeric code to hide the name. Here's another example from ancient Smyrna, which was one of the 7 cities that we hear about at the beginning of Revelation. This particular Greek epigram says, "I love a woman whose number is 731. And another from Smyrna that says, "I love a woman whose number is 616. Now, there might be a little bit of ambiguity here because it's possible that 2 different names could be spelled with the same numbers. But here the reader was told to look for the number 666. So the Greek spelling of Neron Kaiser, or Caesar Nero, translates into Hebrew. Remember that Hebrew is written right to left instead of left to right, but it would be Resh, Samek, Quof, Nun, Vav, Resh, Nun, and each of these letters then, using a particular Hebraic numbering system, would have a value, and when you total up these numbers, it neatly comes to 666. So this is what they're referring to. The sum of the letters of Nero Caesar in Hebrew is 666. However, it's also true that this is the sum of the Greek letters for the word beast, or therion. I will not get involved in the conspiracy involving Monster Drink. I'll let you worry about that. Now, while all of this is very intriguing, it certainly was true in the ancient world that people would substitute numbers for names and expect people to be able to figure it out. Some scholars have protested that in Hebrew there were several numbering schemes, and that really for the Greeks and the Romans in the ancient world, Hebrew was a pretty obscure language, so it would be unlikely that the original readers of Revelation would be able to decode a Hebrew name. On the other hand, Revelation has one of the greatest numbers of allusions to the Old Testament, and one larger estimate was over 400 verbal allusions. I think it is possible that there were some ancient Hebrew people who spoke Greek who would be able to get this and figure it out, and maybe it had even become a common thing for people to understand. I don't know. But as I said, it also could be spelling beast. It's possible then that John merely meant beast, but other associations in the chapter lead to this specific identification with Nero as the ultimate type of the beast. So at the end of the day, honestly, we don't know, but the suggestion that it does mean Nero through this numbering system from Hebrew is very intriguing. Once again, just to remind us, the overall theme of Revelation is the encouragement of the faithful in the midst of persecution. So John is not trying to give us a roadmap that will specifically tell us that it will be a certain nation in the future that will be harboring the Antichrist, and that the number of the beast means something very specific in our modern world, but rather just very general symbols primarily taken from the Old Testament, and predicting that the people at the time were undergoing a type of persecution, and that seeing the heaven and understanding the final realities would give them a kind of encouragement and faith in the midst of this persecution. So also, we would be reminded that we are called to oppose the worship of the beast in every age. So anytime the state demands unholy worship which contradicts God, we're called to stand up and refuse to give them that kind of worship. Continuing on then, Revelation 14 opens as a counterpoint to the worship of the beast described in chapter 13. And as we have already noted, the beast is the Roman emperor who demands worship of himself as a god through the imperial cult. Many merchants and well-to-do citizens of the Roman provinces of Asia were grateful for the peace and prosperity which Rome had given to the region, and would have been very reluctant to resist Rome and to spurn this demand to worship the imperial cult. One such place could have been the ancient city of Pergamum, which we talked about earlier. And it's obvious that before the time of the Romans, there were many local wars and even piracy at sea. And now, with the peace of Rome, or Pax Romana, being imposed, the province then enjoyed this prosperity and peace which it previously hadn't, and became a very rich and wealthy province. And so some of the people living there could have been extremely grateful to Rome for this, and therefore felt it was their obligation to go ahead and offer the worship of the imperial cult. Out of gratitude, the worship of Roma and Augustus was established in Pergamum and later in Smyrna. Pergamum even created a choral association which existed to sing hymns to Augustus as a god within his temple. So as we see what's written later in chapter 14 of Revelation, it's possible that the description of the sound of harps and the singing of a new hymn before the throne of God stands in direct opposition to this type of well-known worship of the emperor. The early Christians are called to live their lives purely for the Lamb and not to compromise by worshiping the Roman emperor. So again, the book of Revelation will move back and forth between times of persecution and descriptions of the enemy triumphing, and then it will move back to the world of heaven and show that the world of heaven is unaffected by this as we move towards the ultimate battle, the final end of all of this.